world.
Hey y'all, I'm Carolina Tony. Today the road brings me to Warm Springs, Georgia. And behind me is a building that is known as the Little White House. This was the home of former President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This is where he stayed when he came to Warm Springs. When President Roosevelt started coming to Warm Springs to partake of the healing waters in the early 20s, not long after that, he realized that he needed to come more often, so therefore he purchased property and built the Little White House. We are going to look around today, learn a little bit about the history, and show you some things and tell you some things that I bet you didn't know. And we'll get started right after this station identification. It was here on this site was the railroad depot where Franklin D. Roosevelt arrived and departed on his various visit to Warm Springs during the years between 1924 and 1945. This is the treatment pools at Warm Springs. They're closed today, but I think I may be able to gain access. Let's just see what happens. Hey.
Hey.
So, if I take a picture?
Yeah.
So, is this where FDR actually came, huh?
Well, actually, yeah.
Over there.
Yeah.
Here is Roosevelt in a pool. So that picture.
These other two.
Yeah. Is this all of the? Is this all the pools in the area? This is where it was?
The Institute's got 2 or 3 up there.
Uh-huh.
But they have a different kind of therapy now.
Yeah, so the water that's coming out, that would have been the spring water there?
Yeah.
And y'all just keep it drained now?
Yeah, well, there's...
So you wring your tiles out? That is cool. Oh, here's a historic picture. So this is the hot springs pools, and up on the hill at the Institute they have more pools, and I'm assuming all those were changing houses. Yeah. The historic Hotel Warm Springs is now a bed and breakfast.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt, our 32nd President of the United States, was 39 years old when he was stricken by the crippling disease polio. One of the reasons he came to Warm Springs, Georgia so much is because of its healing waters, or at least he thought so. That's why he built the Little White House. So as often as he came, he would have somewhere to stay. A founder of the Warm Springs Institute for polio patients, as well as the founder of March of Dimes.
Right. But this was used by the pools.
But it was used by the pools by the polio patients.
But
yeah.
He did design it, and he originally used...
So
his shoes were 10Ds.
Yeah, so he wore size 10D because he was over 6 foot.
Yeah.
But those were his leg braces.
Each one of those weighed about 10 pounds.
Yeah.
Those shoes, we're assuming, are only really right there just to show how the braces would connect to them.
Yeah. A 1940 Willie's Roadster was given to FDR for his 58th birthday. And he never drove it. Pretty cool ride though.
FDR was president when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. I'm sure some of you may remember hearing this.
A date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
This is a 1938 Ford. This is the last car FDR drove here in Warm Springs. The license tag reads FDR 1 1945 was made for him in the Georgia prison factory. The interesting thing about this car is it was designed by FDR himself so he could control the car by his hands. The throttle was controlled by the hand lever on the right. The clutch and the brake would be controlled by the left hand. FDR was instrumental in bringing electricity to the rural farms. At the time of his presidency, hardly anyone in the rural areas had electricity, and those that did was very expensive. Something that was different from any other president is FDR had fireside chats that people would sit around their radio and listen to him talk to the public, and he was known as the people's friend. In 1935, Roosevelt created the Rural Electrification Administration, an agency based on Roosevelt's observation that farms of rural America needed electricity. Fortunately, at the president's little White House in Warm Springs, we don't have to go through security anymore. There's the Marine Corps sentry post, and right across from it, the United States Secret Service sentry post, and the bump gate. A little different from what we have nowadays. This is the servants' quarters in the front of the little White House. This is where Lizzie McDuffie, she was Roosevelt's essential housekeeper. Irvin McDuffie, 1882 to 1946, he was the president's indispensable valet. And also Daisy McPhee Bonner. She was born in 1903 and died in 1958. She was called the Queen of the Larder. Queen of the Larder? That means she was the cook. Oh, so we are upstairs in the servants' quarters, and there's a little small bathroom, sitting room with a stove to keep warm. Little bedroom. Looks like maybe a queen-size bed, really. The servants were on duty 24 hours a day when the president was here. This is the bedroom that Daisy Bonner used, Roosevelt's cook. When he was here, it was an agreement with her other employees that while the president was in Warm Springs, all her attention was devoted to him. And sometimes President Roosevelt had guests, and they would have stayed at the guest house. And the guest house was a little more fancier than the servants' quarters, all heated with a fireplace. Because the Roosevelts took office during the end of the Depression, one of the things that Eleanor did, she started a place called Val Kill Shops. It was a place for unemployed people during the Depression. And a lot of the furniture used in this guest house was made in the Val Kill Shops in Hyde Park, New York. Just a few weeks before the end of World War II, on April the 12th, 1945, Franklin D. Roosevelt died in this house in Warm Springs, Georgia. We are going to see his deathbed. A little different back then as is today. There is a Marine Corps sentry post. So they wouldn't want anybody to sneak up on the president. This is the kitchen that Daisy Bonner would prepare FDR's meals in during his visits to Warm Springs. This small cottage is quite compact. So he was sitting at his table having his portrait painted,
Working on
the speech. Okay.
And he collapsed, and his cousin said he kind of leaned forward, and she thought he dropped something on the rug. So she went over to look, and I guess she had bent down near his chair, and she said he said something like, "I have a terrific pain at the back of my head." He had a cerebral hemorrhage, is what happened.
Wow.
And then he became unconscious, so they took him to the bedroom. He was in a coma. But that was his favorite spot, to sit near the fireplace.
So this was taken in the room where he collapsed.
In the
last
chair he collapsed
time he visited
during the last visit.
would have been the dining room. This is where they would have had all their meals.
Yeah. Well, they had a lot of picnics, but in the house, this is where they would have done it. He wanted to combine the living room and the dining room. That was his idea.
FDR had this banister put in. He loved sailing, and he said that this deck reminded him of looking over the bow of a ship. There's the Marine Corps post, as well as another sentry post there. And I'm sure over on that side of the house. So,
And those steps were put in to go down to what became the
is that where the steps are now?
Yes.
Okay, so steps are there
Right.
now, and this
See,
is what it looked
it's
like.
storage now, but it was.
Here is the secretary's bedroom. And let's go into the president's bedroom. And on April the 12th, 1945, President was carried to this room by his staff when he collapsed while he was having his portrait drawn. Around 3:35, after tremendous medical efforts, the nation's 32nd president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, 63 years old, was pronounced dead. The president's body was taken to Washington, D.C. for the state funeral. From there, he was taken to his family's home in Hyde Park, New York, where he was buried in the Rose Garden.
He left Warm Springs for the last time on that April afternoon in 1945. There was no doubt this country had lost one of its greatest leaders.
And look, original toilet paper. Now, here's something I'm gonna note, and I'm just guessing, that this toilet has been elevated. It's up on 2 blocks higher because he had problems sitting. It was not an easy task for him as he was paralyzed from the waist, partially paralyzed from the waist down, that a higher throne made it easy for him to sit. Okay, so the president, this is in a mystery. Did he prefer the toilet paper over or under? And it appears that he liked the under method. And this is Eleanor's bedroom.
Chairs were huge, they were heavy, they were wide, they were difficult to turn. So he said something like, "I need a smaller wheelchair." So we had someone at their house cut the legs off a wooden chair. He redesigned he designed the front wheels for it himself. He decided to put the smaller wheel on the back because he thought it would be easier for him to turn it by himself, which therapists say is true. And he picked out a chair with no arms because he said, with no arms, I can slide myself off onto another seat, which is really safer.
Originally, the road coming to the little White House would have been dirt. The guest house over here, servants' quarters here, down in the bottom was the garage where they kept his car. This is the unfinished portrait that President Roosevelt had wanted a portrait painted of him seated. It would have looked probably like this. As he had his cottage here at Warm Springs, sitting at a desk, writing a speech, having his portrait made. That's when he collapsed. It was never finished. And this is it today. And had she finished that portrait, this is what the completed work would look like. Well, that is going to do it to our trip to FDR's Little White House here in Warm Springs, Georgia. I hope you've enjoyed this trip. I hope you learned a thing or two. I know I did. If you did, be sure to give me a big old thumbs up. Be sure to share this video with your family and friends. But until next time, y'all have a good day.